Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, more breaking news, this time from Washington. President Trump's embattled chief strategist, Steve Bannon, is out of Team Trump. A White House statement says that the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, and Steve Bannon have mutually agreed today will be his last day in the office. The former Trump campaign guru and leading voice of the alt-right had several high-profile disagreements with other senior members of the president's staff and, crucially, members of his family. Let's go live now to our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie, you've got to tell us more.
Yes, Matt, the man who is credited with masterminding the Trump election is no longer in the Trump White House. Now, we're learning that Steve Bannon, in fact, resigned on August the 7th, but it's only now been revealed that this is his last day. I think the most obvious explanation for his removal is down to the new Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, who must have seen Bannon as a disruptive and unwelcome force who'd overplayed his hand in the White House. Now, the president had been telling insiders for some time that he was worried that Steve Bannon was a leaker, someone prepared to take his war with others in the inner circle and go public with it. I think most significant in that, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster, but also as the economic nationalist in the inner circle, he was at odds with the so-called globalists, Gary Cohn, Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, which is why on the stock exchange floor in New York, when news of his removal came through, there were cheers. Traders were exchanging high fives with one another because for corporate America, his removal is something to celebrate. Now, you might remember on Saturday Night Live, he was characterized as the Grim Reaper, the kind of purveyor of a dark message. And he is a hardliner on immigration, tough on trade, not interested in moderation, always playing to the base. And as he himself bragged when he was Breitbart editor, he was someone who'd provided a platform for the alt-right. The question is, what happens next? There were rumors that the president had wanted to do this for some time, but he was worried that what damage Steve Bannon might do to him on the outside. Does Steve Bannon go back to Breitbart to whip up the base when President Trump steps away from the messaging that won him the election? Steve Bannon may be gone from the White House, in short, but this is certainly not the last we're going to hear from him.
And we'll be listening out. Kylie Morris, thanks very much indeed.
Donald Trump has lost his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, fired, we understand, in what can be seen as a win for Chief of Staff John Kelly. Now, Bannon played a prominent role in the president's America First election campaign message and has been accused of harbouring anti-Semitic and white nationalist sentiments. With a mounting controversy over the death of an anti-racist protester in Charlottesville, Bannon's role was increasingly controversial. But it was after an interview this week where he undermined the president on North Korea that it looks like his fate was sealed. I'm joined from Washington by our correspondent David Willis. David, why now? What's behind the timing?
Well, that's an interesting question, Nick. Steve Bannon was, of course, one of the architects of Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election last year, and he was behind the right-wing website Breitbart News. Now, in recent weeks, he's been accused of leaking to the press. He gave a controversial interview to a liberal magazine here a few days ago, in which, as you mentioned in your introduction, he appeared to contradict the Trump administration's position on North Korea. And he's known to have clashed with others close to President Trump, including his son-in-law Jared Kushner and his daughter Ivanka, the people that Steve Bannon brands the globalists within this White House. Well, the new Chief of Staff, John Kelly, has been looking basically to install a sense of discipline into the White House. He apparently has had Steve Bannon under review, so it was said, for several weeks. And today, a very brief and terse statement was issued saying that Steve Bannon will be leaving as of today. As for what he does now, there's suggestions that Steve Bannon may go back to Breitbart News and continue to be highly influential on the right wing of American politics.
Well, That was going to be my next question, David, because if he does do that, as is being mooted, what might the effect be on Trump and his administration?
Well, it depends whether he offers support from his new perch or criticism. And Breitbart has been particularly critical of some in the administration, H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor among them. And Steve Bannon has been pretty open in his opposition to those sorts of people. But you know what? We've seen a lot of people leaving this administration in recent weeks, among them the press spokesman, the director of communications, the White House chief of staff. Now, the chief strategist, Steve Bannon, is out the door. Some might speculate that perhaps this era of chaos is coming to an end. But Donald Trump remains his own man, Nick, as we've seen this week in his comments about the events last weekend at Charlottesville in Virginia.
Somehow I think there's enough in the story to keep you busy for a few more days, weeks, months and years yet, David. Thank you very much for that. Let's return to the story of Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's controversial chief strategist, who in the last few hours has been fired. And what does this mean then for the direction of travel for Trump's administration? I'm joined by Richard Painter, who worked in the White House under George W. Bush as his chief ethics lawyer. Thank you for coming on, Mr. Painter. You've been critical with some of your tweets and messages. Surely this is the moment to celebrate. The president has woken up to public opinion. He's trying to now put things right. Are you ready to congratulate him?
Well, I think this is definitely a step in the right direction to remove Mr. Bannon. But there are still others in this White House who have connections with the alt-right, which is a really very dangerous group. They spread racist stereotypes on the internet and encourage even more extremist groups, such as the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis who were rallying in Charlottesville. The alt-right has sought to influence our foreign policy. Sebastian Gorka is still in the White House. He is very much a threat to our foreign policy. He has an obsession with Muslims and really wants us in a confrontational posture toward Muslims throughout the world, which is definitely not in the American interest. Stephen Miller is still in the White House. He has connections with the alt-right. And there are others with extremist views. They all need to be removed if the president is going to seek to stabilize this administration and convince the Republicans in the House and the Senate and the American people that he is capable of being an effective leader, much less, of course, the Democrats, who may never really want to accept him. But at this point, the Republicans are very frustrated. And certainly getting rid of Steve Bannon is a step in the right direction, but there's more work to be done.
And what now of Mr. Bannon? Is there a danger that he could be a considerable thorn in the side of the president? He could cause real issues if he reconnected with that fan base that the president had?
We are concerned about that. We're concerned about his going back to Breitbart News. Breitbart News engaged in extensive race baiting over the past few years. And was a self-proclaimed platform for the alt-right. So if he goes back to Breitbart News, encourages more of this alt-right business, I think we're going to see more unrest in some of our cities, as we did in Charlottesville. And then there might very well be attempts to influence the White House. And that would be most unfortunate. There are some ethics rules in place that would prohibit Steve Bannon from lobbying back to the White House on behalf of Breitbart News. And I hope those are taken seriously and enforced.
And you speak understandably dismissively of what Bannon and what the president achieved, but they're only there because they got a lot of votes. So they clearly appeal to a lot of Americans. Why?
Well, they did get a lot of votes. They didn't get as many as their quite unpopular rival Hillary Clinton. We had a lot of Americans who went.
Still won.
Yeah, very dissatisfied with both alternatives. And I think we are in a situation where Americans have given Donald Trump a chance. It's been 8 months, and it's a perfect waiting when he started in the White House. And I think it's time for the president to recalibrate what they've been doing.
Has he got time? I'm sorry to talk over you, Mr. Painter. Has he got? How much time has he got to recalibrate?
I don't think he has much time at all because people are losing patience. He's lost the support of the business community. The chief executive officers all quit his industrial council just a few days ago. So he needs to make a clean sweep of the alt-right people out of the White House, out of the administration, fire Gorka, fire Miller, and the rest of them, and then recalibrate his policy to focus on the issues the American people care about, making sure we have health care for all Americans and that we stabilize the economy.
All right. I'm grateful to you. I'm sorry to talk over you, sir. Richard Painter, I'm very grateful for your time this evening. Thank you.
Tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets in the US city of Boston to oppose a rally featuring speakers from the far right. A small group of white nationalists are attempting to hold what they call a free speech rally. It comes a week, of course, after an anti-racist demonstrator was killed during violent clashes in Charlottesville, Virginia. Our North America correspondent Aleem Maqbool is in Boston for us now. Aleem, after last week, one imagines things might be rather tense, but it's looking pretty relaxed there. How would you describe the mood?
Well, yes, all the talk ahead of today was about the potential for violence, about that free speech rally, because a lot of the speakers have also been involved in far-right rallies elsewhere in the country, in white supremacist events even. But the real story of today has been the thousands and thousands of Bostonians who have flooded Boston Common to surround those very few free speech protesters in a bandstand. They've been chanting anti-racism slogans, even anti-Trump slogans, of course, very upset with the fact, as they see it, that their president did not unequivocally condemn the far-right protesters from last week in Charlottesville. There's been a lot of discussion during the week, a lot of shock among many about what happened in Charlottesville with the sight of swastikas and Nazi salutes and, of course, the violence. But, of course, some on the right have been energized by that. But today, Boston, with thousands of people streaming through the city to get here to show their feelings, the story has really been about this city sending a statement that those kind of images are not things that represent this city or this country.
Aleem, thank you very much. Aleem Maqbool.
And hundreds of police officers have been deployed in Boston in an effort to deter violence between rival protesters. A group of right-wing activists have been holding what they called a free speech rally, but they've been far outnumbered by tens of thousands of counter-protesters staging their own fight supremacy march through the city. And the former White House strategist Steve Bannon has wasted no time going back to his old job at a right-wing news website. In the last few minutes, President Trump tweeted, "Steve Bannon will be a tough and smart new voice at Breitbart News. Fake news needs the competition," he said.
He was the far-right architect of the Trump campaign. Steve Bannon vowed to destroy the establishment and reshape the US with economic nationalism that put America first.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
But Bannon's out of the White House, the latest high-profile advisor to be seemingly dumped by Trump. The man labelled the Great Manipulator was reportedly behind some of Trump's most controversial policies, including aggressive attitudes on trade towards China, the immigration ban on Muslim-majority countries, and the tearing up of US participation in the Paris Climate Change Agreement.
If you think they're going to give you your country back without a fight, you are sadly mistaken. Every day it is going to be a fight.
So did Bannon's star shine too brightly for Trump? The president has for some time been reportedly annoyed at his advisor being seen as the power behind the throne. Then this week, amid the turmoil of far-right rallies in Charlottesville, Trump was under pressure to fire Bannon, who's been accused by critics of holding white supremacist views, something he denies. On Tuesday, a sign that Bannon was on his way out, when Trump only gave a lukewarm endorsement.
I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist, I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon.
Turns out he's heading back to the right-wing nationalist news site Breitbart. He claims he resigned rather than was fired. In an interview with the Weekly Standard yesterday, shortly after confirming his departure, he said,
"The Trump presidency that we fought for and won is over."
And as for his own future, he says,
"I feel jacked up. Now I'm free. I've got my hands back on my weapons. Someone said it's Bannon the barbarian. I'm definitely going to crush the opposition.
There's been a lot of drama in the House, and
Just what his departure means for the Trump presidency isn't yet clear, but comedians will certainly mourn the loss of this parody. As Steve Bannon declares, "I can fight better on the outside."
Welcome back to Reliable Sources. President Trump's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, was always something of a mystery, which is partly why SNL was able to depict him as, I'm sure you remember, the Grim Reaper. Now, Bannon loved that. He wanted that evil Darth Vader kind of persona out there. But he's actually quite chummy with reporters, and that's continued even now that he's been forced out of the White House. He's back at the helm of Breitbart News, and President Trump has weighed in on that this weekend, saying it's great because fake news needs the competition. In one of his recent interviews, Bannon told the Weekly Standard that, "I feel jacked up. Now I'm free. I've got my hands back on my weapons." Someone said it's Bannon the Barbarian. So think about that. When he says he's got his hands back on his weapons, he's talking about Breitbart. He's talking about his media company as being his weapons, not as his journalistic force for good, but as his weapons. Well, joining me now to discuss all of this, Jonathan Lemire is back, the AP's White House correspondent, and Joshua Green is here, CNN political analyst, also the author of the best-timed book of the year, Devil's Bargain, all about Steve Bannon and Donald Trump and the campaign. So, Joshua, what do you think, what is Bannon talking about when he says he has his hands back on his weapons? What does that tell us about him?
Well, it tells us that he thinks he can use Breitbart News, that outlet, as a weapon in the political wars in the same way that, frankly, that he did before he went into the Trump administration. Breitbart is an outlet with a distinct political worldview that it pushes, and its story choice, and who it tends to go after in the kind of stories it reports about. Yeah. It has a real effect on the culture, and we know now that there are certain things that Bannon wants to do in the world that he wasn't able to do from inside the White House. Now he can try and push those same policy arguments from outside, from Breitbart. Is Breitbart big enough for him, or do you believe some of the reports out there that he's interested in launching some sort of television network? This is something that had been discussed in the closing days of the campaign. The fact that Trump had this list of 12 to 14 million small donors who are intensely loyal to him and could be built into an audience. I certainly think it's a possibility. The interesting thing to me, though, is Bannon has always said that TV is not where it's at. This rising generation of populist Republicans.
Hey, we're on CNN here.
This is what he says, that they are internet-based, and that that Fox News is for old geriatric conservatives, and that the rising generation of populist conservatives were more web-focused. Now, maybe that now that he's been in and out of the White House, he does have a broader vision that could encapsulate some sort of TV presence. But he told me when we did an interview just after he was fired or removed on Friday, that he was looking to go global. So he is going to grow Breitbart News in some way, shape, or form. It's just not clear yet what that medium is going to be.
And John, what does Bannon's removal from the White House mean for the White House and for the press corps? I don't think I'm giving away any secrets by saying he was a source for a lot of reporters. You didn't see him quoted on the record very often, but he would talk to reporters on background. Are we going to see less leaks out of the White House?
It's possible. Certainly the president in recent days became of the belief that Steve Bannon was among the leakers in the White House. Certainly, yes, until this rash of on-the-record interviews in recent days, including one that may or may not have been intentional. He would rarely be quoted by name, but he would certainly have his fingerprints on certain stories. He would contribute to them. I think in the White House right now, there's a little bit of, in certain quarters of the White House, some nervousness as to how this will play out. I mean, it's not just that Steve Bannon is going to go after Democrats and establishment Republicans like Paul Ryan, like he always has, as the head of Breitbart. There's a suggestion that some of his enemies in the White House could come under scrutiny from the Breitbart forces. This could be Jared Kushner or Gary Cohn. There's a belief that he will be reluctant to take on the president by name, at least for a while, but he has said that he is going to push the White House to fulfill the campaign promises.
But do we make too much of Bannon's power? I mean, if he had been that successful, Joshua, wouldn't he still be at the White House?
That's a fair point, and it is just a fact that you have more power working inside the White House to affect policy directly than you do working outside the White House. However, Breitbart really was a powerful force in politics while Steve Bannon was at the helm. They really did drive the debate in the Republican Party, not just through Breitbart, but because there's a whole infrastructure of conservative talk radio and websites that seem to move in the same direction. That stopped, more or less, when Bannon went into the White House, because the association with Breitbart was actually problematic for him. When they would attack Kushner or somebody in the White House, Bannon came under attack from Trump himself. And so now that he is uninhibited and can push whatever argument he wants publicly, it could well be that he has more influence in shaping the public debate and putting pressure on the administration than he did when he was in a room with Trump and other advisors.
That's interesting. John, briefly on Hope Hicks, now the interim communications director. There's been a guessing game about who would take that job. What does it mean that there's now an interim communications director? Does it matter?
Well, first of all, it means that Hope Hicks is pretty much bulletproof, at least to this point in this Trump White House. She has been one of the original members. She has been there smartly, stayed out of the spotlight.
Never done a TV interview.
That's right. She used to work for Ivanka Trump. She was part of the original core with the president. She has been extremely loyal. The president respects her.
But does it mean that he can't find an outsider who's willing to come on board and run his comms?
They have certainly had a lot of trouble finding people in the past. I think there is a suggestion they are still going to look for a permanent person. Hope Hicks will certainly still wield influence in that White House. She is often at the president's side. There have been moments in his Oval Office interview with the Times a few weeks back. She was the only aide in the room. So she is going to be someone, whether she holds this title of communications director or not, it's unclear whether she wants it full time. She is going to have influence in this White House.
Joshua, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.